Elrond was as noble and as fair in face as an elf lord, as strong as a warrior, as wise as a wizard, as venerable as a king of dwarves, and as kind as summer.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to some the One Ring role playing game content. Mostly off topic. Thank you for the shout out. We don't have a store. We don't have merch. If you're interested in merch, I guess I don't know, comment or something. But we're just gonna have what would have normally been part of a session zero, but kind of like scheduling and such like was against us. And we're having a focused conversation around traits. We're going to cover a couple of things here. We're going to have a quick recap on the rules around traits so that everybody in the group is same page, what their purpose is and when they can be used and how you would use them. And then what we're going to do is we're going to walk through each of the traits that each of the characters have and just kind of establish a consensus around what that trait can and can't do. So we've got some boundaries for the table. Clearly, any examples we use would be illustrative, but it's about kind of taking the same page rule set and then sharing out kind of an understanding so that we're basically going to be okay. So, quick then recap on the purpose of traits. So traits are there to reduce mechanical similarity between characters and kind of allow some more flavour for specific characters. And you get two kinds of traits. You get those that are only available to specific callings or specific cultures, which are considered to be specialities, and then traits that are available to everybody, but of which you select from the pool, and they are called distinctive features. But fundamentally, they are the same thing. They're both traits. They just select them from different lists. And essentially, the purpose of a trait is to let a character who possesses that trait have a better time within the story because of that trait. So it's about the individual with a trait would fare better than an individual without the trait if they were both placed into the same circumstances. So it's a differentiator. You don't get to improve traits or anything like that. They're just qualities of your person. And the description of the traits is really important. There's a tendency, I think, to rely upon the natural language definition of what the word or the description, the name of the trait. But they all do have descriptions behind them, and some of those descriptions are more subtle than the natural language definition of the word. So that's the second part of the conversation, is to try to understand where that boundary is and what that consensus is. And traits are intended to be an at-the-table consensus. So it's about what we as a group of players want to do in our game with our characters with the traits that we possess. There'll be some, at least, family similarity with what other players in other games with the same traits are trying to achieve, but it's about what we feel and what our tolerances are, more than any kind of hard and fast rules around it. And traits really live in that intersection between the mechanical weight and the fiction. So you kind of like bring a trait to bear upon the story as it is at that moment in time. And that allows there to be discussion and dialogue about, well, this trait applies in this specific circumstance. So any examples that we use are just by their nature got to be very illustrative in that way. Okay. So I think the first thing about traits is that they're a guide to role play. So they allow you to kind of take some decisions about what your character would or wouldn't do. Nothing mechanical about that. It's just, hey guys, I'm reckless. I chase after the orc without thinking. It doesn't. You're not looking for any advantage. You're not trying to trigger anything. It's just a description and a guide to your personality. You might be like, well, my smoking trait means I'm always pottering around with some smoking apparatus. I'm always cleaning my pipe or packing down my weed. You're not doing anything more than enriching the game for everybody, so they're just a cue. Then they have mechanical weight. They have essentially the rules allow for three use cases, specific uses for traits. The first of which is where you invoke the trait to get an automatic success. So because you're so good at this, or you've got this particular quality, your basic level of competence allows you to achieve. But it only allows you to achieve a normal grade success. You deny yourselves the opportunity to achieve a great success or an extraordinary success. So it's essentially, this is my bread and butter. Of course, I can make a dagger with my metalsmithing or what have you trait, but because I'm not really putting masses of effort into it, it just turns into a standard dagger or what have you. And it reflects baseline competency. There's got to be a risk of failure, so it's not, you can't just invoke a trait if I wasn't even asking for a roll. But if a roll is called for, then you can say, well, because of this trait, I think I should be able to automatically pass. And you invoke the trait before you make a roll. So you don't fail a roll and then try to get the pass. And you get your first advancement point. So any advancement point that gets triggered because you passed a test, you kind of get because of that. Okay, cool. Any questions on that so far, guys? Are we all same page?
Yeah. So I just have a question there. So you don't necessarily have to make that roll. I mean, you could if you wanted to.
Yeah. So if you choose to make the roll, then you're basically saying I'm going to take the risk. So if you fail that roll, you fail that roll. You don't get to come back around and pass it because you've got the trait. You're gambling a little. However, you have the opportunity to get a great or an extraordinary success, which could trigger more beneficial things for you. But you pass with the minimum amount for a pass, basically. The most basic of competences.
Okay, so my question was because I may have misunderstood the rules a little bit, because I've looked at the paragraphs where it talks about the advancement points, and it's my impression that you don't get an advancement points, or it says on the pages here that you get an advancement point if you make a roll. Unless I'm reading it wrong. I mean, I just wanted to clarify that so we all have a consensus on it.
So what we're going to rule it as is that you get the advancement point if you invoke a trait to pass the test, because as Joe has said, essentially what happens is you start the process of making the roll, but you don't actually roll any dice. You just say, well, I'm going to take an automatic success. So whether that's a house rule or whether it's rules as intended or what have you, is what we're going to be playing.
Yeah. Okay, so just my final comment. What I wanted to say is I just wanted to get a clarification on this. I think I agree with Joe, where I think the rules are a bit unclear on some of the things here. So the last thing I wanted to say, my last comment is on page 194, it says a player can be awarded one advancement point when he uses a common skill and succeeds. Now, this particular one doesn't mention a roll, so that would be, in line with what you just said.
Yeah.
I'm using a skill. I want to get something done. I succeed because obviously using a trait is an automatic success. I get a success, that gives me an advancement point. So
yeah,
I just wanted to just bring it up.
It would be only a level 1 advancement point, though. A free, you can only use an auto pass on a level 1, though.
That's correct, yes.
Okay. But then, just on a technicality, if I get extraordinary success, I can still fill in my 1 or the first one, then have on the next occasion another extraordinary success and fill the second one.
That's correct, yes.
And then obviously for the third one have to. Okay, that's much more clear to me now.
Yeah, it's just different barriers for entry.
Yeah, that's right, yeah. Okay, so we are same page then, that you invoke a trait to get an automatic success. You get the most basic success that you could have, so you achieve whatever would be considered basic competence in that role. You have to invoke it before you roll, and it does grant you the first of the advancement points that would be available to you. So the second use case for a trait is invoking a trait where you're not given a role, but you feel because of your trait you should have an opportunity to intercede. So I think the example that the rule book uses is that you've just been fighting some orcs. One of the orcs is playing dead, and the orc now is kind of like getting up and running away. But one of the characters has, I think, the cautious trait, and they say, "Whoa, hold on a minute! My cautious nature would have meant I was keeping a really close eye on the battlefield, so I would have spotted this." And therefore, everybody kind of says, "Great, yep." And the Lord Master gives them an opportunity to chase the orc, maybe like an athletics roll. I can't remember exactly. Okay. So this is an occasion where I'm just rolling the narrative on in a direction that you're not entirely happy with, and you want to put a little bit of a break on that and influence the direction of the narrative a bit because of a trait that you possess. Okay. So that requires you to go, whoa, hold on a minute. Because of this trait, I'd just like to take this action. So it's an interruption, essentially. In card game terms, it's like an interrupt, or it's a response, or what have you, that you would invoke. I think this, of the three, this is the least likely to occur at the table, because I think naturally through the flow of the game, there's an ebb and flow. There's a backwards and forwards between the players and the lore master. And that means that you guys would be like, well, hold on, this is what we're doing, that's happening, I'm going to respond to your description in this way. And my tendency is to kind of always allow a roll, even though I might adjust the target number to be higher, because I perceive the fact that that actually this is just a difficult task to do. So I think the dialogue that's most realistic to happen is that you kind of say, actually, could we reduce the target number because I possess this trait? Because I am cautious, I should be going against a standard difficulty as opposed to a harder difficulty. So I think that there's some grounds for discussion there, and certainly at the table, I think that it would be a dialogue that would be sensible and beneficial for us to have. Because I've got the leadership, my target number for talking to Dane should be lower than otherwise, because we're two leaders engaged in a conversation kind of thing. And that feels like a reasonable way, as opposed to, you don't get a roll when you're talking to Dane, kind of thing. Okay. Any questions on that one?
I think reducing the target number is fair. Anything that gets players using their traits more is good.
Yeah.
Because that's, they're there to help you define your character and bring out the role play in you.
Yeah. Agree. So the third kind of like use case then for traits is to get an advancement point where you've got a great success and you feel a trait applies. This is reflecting the characters kind of being able to advance further in an area that they have a natural affinity for. Obviously this needs to be declared at the point that you kind of say, great, I want to take the advancement point. Does this trait apply? And it's the way to get that kind of final advancement point, really. I don't think there's much more to be said for it than that, if I'm honest.
No, it's just a kind of fairly specific use case for it, isn't it?
Yeah. So one of the things that kind of box text on page 92 allows is for the lore masters to invoke a player's trait. And the kind of implication, I guess, of that is a little bit, traits can be a double-edged sword. And therefore I could kind of invoke a trait for a situation that might be more of a complication than a benefit. Because you're willful, you're choosing to disregard that good advice or what have you. I guess I'm not massively fond of that, if I'm honest, because it feels like you could be removing player agency. But what I think would be true and which would be sensible is that the traits are also a tool to explain and to articulate how you interact with the world and how the world perceives you. So characters will act as if traits are true. So, for instance, if you've got the smoking trait, well, maybe you smell of the leaf, and those people who find it to be a dirty, stinking habit are going to be behaving against you, even though actually it's just because of the smoking trait that they form that view. Or if you've got the willful trait, then characters will respond to you because you're a willful personality, which maybe they meet you with equal force, or they decide not to kind of contribute because you're overpowering and dominating in the conversation.
I suppose they can kind of sometimes balance against each other then. So if you add, like going back to the talking to Dana example, you've got leadership, so you're talking to him on his level, but actually you're willful, so it sounds like you're trying to kind of maybe come over him. So you might have gained an advantage and then lost it again through your own traits.
Yeah, but I think what I'm going to do is it's just going to be about the scene set and the initial kind of like first impressions. what I don't want to be doing is invoking a trait counter to what you guys are wanting to do, because it's taking what should be a positive quality of the character and using it against you with no advantage to you in that sense. And I think it steps across the boundary of player agency as well. If you were to look at a system like Fate, which has got aspects which are very similar to traits, the Lawmaster can invoke a trait to complicate the player's life. But in exchange, if the player accepts that invocation, they get a fate point that they can use to their benefit later down. So there's a currency that accompanies the fact about traits, about aspects where there's no currency in traits in the One Ring.
I wouldn't personally have an issue with it if it added something to the story that you were trying to tell.
Yeah,
this is the thing.
So that would be my currency back kind of thing. Would be that we are engaging in the story in a way that kind of. You're like not railroading. It's not like I wouldn't take it as a loss of player agency, because the benefit we'd be getting would be that enrichment of the environment.
Yeah, and I think it's about kind of just a bit of a nudge to say, would you be doing that if you've got that role playing characteristic that's already been established in the fiction? That doesn't feel. So I think there's a little bit about keeping us honest by keeping true to traits. So Joe, you look like you're going to come in.
Yeah, I was going to mention Fate, and it's almost like they said, hey, aspects are cool, let's make them into aspects as well. But the thing about aspects in Fate is when the GM invokes them, it's because there's going to be fun. So because of your ties to the Brotherhood of the Brotherhood of the Sickle or something, and the fact that you betrayed them, you're constantly in danger, or you're more likely to be recognised by their clans.
Yeah,
there's always going to be something that comes about by the GM invoking them. Whereas it feels like if you were to be a malicious Lawmaster in the One Ring, you could basically just make things really horrible for people there's no upside.
Absolutely, yeah. It's the lack of upside. So let's move on to the specific traits. So I think this is going to be an interesting conversation with not much time to have in. But there we go. So I've just listed out the traits. I started with Cirque, kind of pretty arbitrarily. It was the first character sheet I came across when I was looking for them. So I think you've got Rhymes of Law, Old Law, Hardy, Tunneling, and Determined now.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I think Rhymes of Law and Old Law bear discussion together, because there's some redundancy, or there's potential for some redundancy between Rhymes of Law and Old Law. So Rhymes of Law, brief compositions in verse created by many cultures to remember significant facts from ancient history. Your knowledge of them can supplement a test of law, but is used especially in conjunction with any custom skill, courtesy, song, or riddle. Scholars may credit much of their knowledge to rhymes. Old Law. You are learned in the traditions and the rumour of bygone days. Your knowledge may derive from different sources, from stories heard around the fire to the dusty records of a chronicler. Chronicler. I don't know. I can't pronounce that word. But so basically, it's about knowing old stuff. So what is the distinction between those two, such that one of them isn't redundant? So for me, Rhymes of Law is kind of like more about the legends and myths of specific cultures. And it's the songs or the tales or the stories that culture tells itself about those legends and those myths that provide you with the facts or the perceived facts. Whereas Old Law is more of a historical truth, kind of like found out through kind of like primary sources and documentation and oral histories that are accurate to the events that occurred, but are divorced from a cultural zeitgeist. So to kind of pull that apart a little bit, so Rhymes of Law might allow you to recall that Beren was given the task to bring back an important relic to claim Luthien's hand in marriage. So if you were to come across something that kind of said, and to do this task, it was equivalent as that given to Beren, you would kind of like know that there's a big, almost impossible task to achieve. And you would kind of be able to look through dense or allegorical tales and pull the meaning from it. And when you're talking to different groups, you could play into these cultural touchstones that kind of help enrich understanding and kind of provide yourself as a credible force. Whereas for old lore, you would have some knowledge of the lineage that sprang from Beren and Luthien's line. So you may know that Dior, Elwing, Elros, all the chieftains of the Dunedain, etc., knew and kind of derived themselves from Beren and Luthien, without necessarily knowing about the tales and the mythology that surround Beren and Luthien. So it's, like Dior begot Elwing, who begot Elros, from which the chieftains of the Dunedain kind of like sprang from the kings of Numenor. But actually, they're just names on a sheet of paper. You don't know the rich tapestry of the stories behind them. So that, for me, is the kind of like difference between those two. Whether that's a sufficient enough difference for you to want both of them or not is kind of like your call.
The whole reason
does that
I went
make
for both
sense?
The specific reason why I took both was because it was more the fact. I know it says you can use it to supplement a lore test for Rhymes of Lore, but it's more for the fact that it's this kind of knowledge that helps get his ass out of trouble in sort of social encounters. Because I have no ability points. I have 2 in song and then nothing in anything else. So Rhymes of Lore was more like, oh shit, I don't really know how to deal with people, but I remember these facts about these kind of things and this song that I heard about them, and it's kind of that's how he kind of would deal with that. So I probably the chance of me invoking Rhymes of Lore for a lore test or a travel test, like a pre-travel roll or any of that sort of thing, is 0 to none. That's where I'd have old lore in as the kind of like the thing, or like a scholarly trait kind of thing. And like I see lore as linked to old lore, and I see Rhymes of Lore as linking to like the song, the courtesy, and the riddle.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So Rhymes of Lore is about the cultural zeitgeist. So it would be about understanding jargon. So in a modern setting, Rhymes of Lore would enable you to kind of like sit down with some investment bankers and understand the ebb and flow and the reference points and all that kind of stuff. Old Lore would be the practice of banking. So it's more about the technical skill of it, for want of a better description.
So like old lore is where his knowledge of broken spells comes from, is my example that I kind of know. I think that's why I selected that as his virtue. Yeah. So it's doing that research and that knowledge and that kind of digging up.
Cool. Does anybody else have anything that they kind of want to chuck in there? I know that it's not necessarily your characters, but it's worth us just building that understanding. Okay. So moving on then to Harday. So you can withstand long hours of toil and travel far without rest or under extreme conditions. So this isn't a normal travel role. This isn't just like a slightly difficult journey. This is an extreme circumstance. So I think this would be invoked when maybe you're weary and you're traveling. So you're pushing yourself through the weariness. You're pushing yourself through the extreme circumstance, or maybe you want to force march to reduce the amount of time or the number of days that journey would take for you. Or maybe it's related to some hazard that focuses upon endurance and kind of like keeping your head down, moving forward, grinding out the tasks. Examples could be if you're getting tortured, so you survive the torture without giving up the information. Or even possibly hopefully more relevant to Cirque would be remaining intellectually focused when listening to basically dull shit. How many times have you kind of like been on a call and you just zoned off and somebody asks you a question and you're back into it?
It's also because he's not, again, like I was quite selective when I picked him. So again, I've got like nothing in athletics. But hardy is what lets me still travel with a group like this.
Yeah.
And actually keep up pace with them and be kind of, it's what's enabled me to adventure far from home. I might not be naturally gifted, but there's nothing like I'm going to push through it regardless.
Yeah, you're grinding it out. You're putting one foot in front of the other. And it's about the extremity of the task or the extremity of what's required that allows hardy to be brought to bear. It's not the innate difficulty of it, it's just the grudge, and I've just got to keep on going in this extreme situation about the physicality and such like. Anything else from anybody, guys? Anything to add? Okay, so moving on to tunneling. You are accustomed to the difficulties of moving in passages dug under the earth. For example, you do not easily lose your sense of direction underground. Clearly, underground situations, navigating tunnels.
Yeah, that was a thematic pick because Roots of the Earth.
It's almost
talks about Roots of the Earth, Searching for Roots, which is my background, is study marvelous architectural achievements of your forefathers, blah 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 blah. Many of them lie deep in the earth and have been ground to dust. This means that to study them, you must first find them.
Yeah.
So I figured it fit with that, so selected it.
Yeah, likelihood of finding an underground system, either naturally occurring or kind of like created through some process. Knowing the sights and sounds and sights, maybe even like a survival equivalent underground.
What I did wonder is the one that I was kind of like, I know we like narratively sort of like coming up with them, but it's like, would that be the sort of thing that it's sort of like, you know how when you watch Time Team, they look at like undulations in the earth and they can tell where a trench has been and things like that. Would that work just for an above
so that
ground
would definitely
ability
help that kind of thing. Yeah, that feels like a fair thing. So in the search for like buried ruins, and clearly if I get a high enough vantage point, then I can see that this looks like it kind of the outlines of the wall or what have you. That would kind of I feel that would be relevant.
I need Aldridge drone.
Aldridge drone. And also the safety of a tunnel or underground working, its age, its provenance, typical usage, that kind of stuff. Anybody got anything to add to that? Moving on to determined. So when you set yourself a goal, you pursue it relentlessly. So this isn't about I'm determined I'm going to overcome this obstacle in front of me. Yeah, that's just life, essentially. Again, this is about the extremity of it. It's about avoiding distractions to achieve your goal. So you maybe if a sorcerer is trying to cloud your mind, this would be the kind of trait that you could invoke to kind of like keep on task. Or even if it's not magical but oratory, is trying to kind of like influence your direction with a persuasive speech, but you're kind of like, no, I am determined to achieve my goals. So also, if you're trying to convince somebody of the rightness of your cause, it feels like the kind of trait you could potentially invoke to demonstrate your commitment to it and the passion that you feel for it. So it's not just about the act of continuing to keep going towards your goal, it's about showing people the level of commitment and determination that you possess to achieve that. And therefore you're more likely to bring it about because of that determination. So that's kind of how I see it. Anybody else on that one?
So I was sort of envisioning it. It's kind of like I could sit there and still, like try and get through it, like unlock a door while the others were fighting off the horde that's behind us that we need to get through the door from. Once I set my mind to kind of focused on that task, it's almost like a tunnel vision type thing.
Yeah, that would be a really good example.
By battle sort of thing.
Yeah, that's a really good example. Yeah, so you would be kind of like, right, can I invoke determined to pass this crafts roll to kind of like break the door down, kind of thing. And that may be a good example of the where you otherwise wouldn't have a roll. You could kind of like invoke it for that as well, kind of thing. Okay. So moving on to Torg then, and I think Torg and Lothar share some traits. So whether you guys want to kind of work through that or not is an open question. So Smithcraft, you love making things with hammer and anvil, and have spent many hours in front of the searing fire of the forge. You can judge the quality of most products of metalwork. So you've got the clear example there in terms of the ability to assess the quality and therefore value of worked metal, but you've also got an affinity with other craftspeople, not just metal smiths, but anybody who involves themselves in a craft. So you've got the social link, the ice break, the kind of common vocabulary kind of thing with that group of people, build rapport, establish credentials, anything that's related to the techniques of smithing that you could move into an adjacent discipline, for instance. So you're not that far off kind of like a lot of the craft skills with the smithing. So load bearing and those kind of more engineering styles you'd have some appreciation of, albeit not expert.
Transferable skills.
Yeah.
Useful.
It definitely for the Smithcraft. Like I don't know if anyone watches Forged in Fire on the History Channel, where they make and test knives. It's a brilliant show.
Okay, call out.
But they often they like they're leather workers, they're carpenters to a degree because they form the handles and things like that. So yeah, the transposable skills across like it's not just hammering metal at a forge.
Yeah. So other things I think from Smithcraft, the ability to withstand searing heat, those days in the forge have kind of given you the ability to kind of manage some of the temperatures that we had recently. And also to understand the quality of provenance of an enemy's weapons. Perhaps if that weapon has any advancements on it, you would be able to establish what those advancements were and therefore maybe work up a tactic to kind of to thwart that. So, for instance, Lothar with Smithcraft and his enemy law Orcs would have a really good way of understanding. Well, the Orcs tend to fight with these kind of weapons, so keep your distance, or whatever. Or this kind of Orc typically has a more barbed weapon, so just be careful of piercing blows or stuff of that nature.
Can you use it for like weaknesses in that case as well? Then could you be like, all right, this tactic I want to use this.
So I think what I would do is I would describe what the quality does, and then you guys can decide how you want to respond to that. So go, Joe.
So are you saying, is this more in a kind of role play sense rather than adhering to the use of traits? So would there be a role here? Would this be an unforeseen action?
I think it would be an unforeseen action, whereas if you're in combat and you're kind of like trying to assess the enemy that's against you, and kind of you'll be able to kind of like have a look at the quality of their weapons to maybe gauge whether they're really experienced or less experienced, or if a particular weapon was of greater quality than the others, maybe that's the leader or what have you. So I think that would be.
I mean, that's definitely. That's definitely the kind of how I see Torg using that trait during the game. So in the last session, we killed some orcs. Now my next kind of thought is, all right, well, let's have a look at their weapons. Let's invoke Smithcraft and say, well, he's interested in this stuff at the very least. His Smithcraft is built into his backstory, so it's quite a big part of his mentality.
Yeah, so let's just say, as an example, you invoke Smithcraft as part of assessing the weapons, and this isn't true. This isn't part of the story, but let's just say they were dwarven made. Yeah, that would be an interesting thing to have established, or maybe kind of like with Lothar, because of his other trait around enemy law Orcs, he would be able to say, well, these are Dol Guldur Orcs, or these are Orcs from Mount Cram, or whatever kind of that is. But even during a battle, because we're going to be using the enemies have advanced weapons, so they're almost like they've got barbed axes and bearded axes and that kind of thing, the enemy equivalent. You may be able to kind of assess from the description if an advancement actually applies and what that advancement may allow because of your knowledge of Smithcraft and how it would have been made.
Could they use it in relation to battle? Like the battle roll at the beginning?
Not
kind
really.
But like if you're running into battle, would one of their assessments be looking at the weapons using Smithcraft?
If I guess if the weapons or the quality of armor and such like was a significant part of the enemy's kind of strength.
I think that's problematic because those preliminary rolls are intended to be getting a sense of the layout of the combat zone and the way that the enemies are presenting themselves is much more than just the gear. So Smithcraft is one part of, you might get something from looking at their gear, but there's much more to that preliminary role than that.
Yeah, and we may spin it the other way around. It may be that we do the preliminary rolls and then we kind of narrate because of the Torgal Loftstar's assessment of the armor. They get an advantage because they're heavily armored, so they'll fight less well in the marsh. So we can kind of use it. You can use it both ways.
I think for me it would be more kind of, you see the enemies approaching, the combat hasn't commenced yet, but you've got a chance to use your traits to start getting that kind of information.
Yeah. Okay, so smoking then. Smoking. You have mastered the art of smoking the herb called pipe, weed, or leaf using a pipe of clay or wood. Practitioners of the art say it gives patience and clarity of mind and helps them greatly to relax, concentrate, or to converse peacefully with others. So I think there's a few things in there. So the first is everybody knows that you hear all of the news at the fag shed. There's no hierarchy in the fag shed at all. So you've got the ability to build a social rapport with other smokers. You're sharing the weed. You're chatting about this is finest Breeland weed and all that kind of jazz. So if you're interacting with people who are also kind of like smokers, then you can start to use it for those social kind of roles. Also, I think with pipeweed and leaf specifically, there's knowledge of trade routes and the connections that the pipeweed kind of goes through, because there are brand names and there's it's not indigenous to a lot of Middle Earth, so you kind of need to have an understanding of those connections that kind of happen. So that feels like it lives in the space. And then I think where smoking is intended to kind of go is to allow the smokers just to take a few moments out, allow them to take a period of calmness. Maybe to kind of like help a riddle roll when they're solving a puzzle, or kind of approaching something in that way. But kind of contrary, the opposite of the suggestion you said with determined, Ben, I don't think you could just have a quick fag break in the middle of a combat and open the door.
Your Hamlet moment.
Yeah. Well, So an immediate time pressure threat might not be the way in which you could kind of like invoke smoking from my perspective.
Can you invoke it to make a point? Because people with pipes always point with their talent, and they make a much better point than everybody else.
You could.
It gives. That's partly why I was drawn to it. It gives you just some nice role play opportunities. But it's definitely a social trait. So smoking is definitely a social trait, and it's all about kind of creating role play opportunities and finding ways to connect with others. In terms of Torg's backstory, he learned it while he was on the trail with the dwarven hunters that he hung out with for a couple of months, and he values it as a way to connect with others around him. Because while he's not naturally sociable, smoking, like you say, Paul, there's a kind of lack of hierarchy there. Yeah. It allows him to connect with other
it's got some really good real world examples as well. There was that bloke, that bloke who walked round the world. As part of when he was doing his training for it, he was a smoker, and they were like, he's like, well, shall I give this up so that it's easier for me to do it while I'm walking? And they were like, no, because it'll help you through so many of your social encounters in countries where you can't speak if you've got a packet of cigarettes.
Yeah, it's common currency. Leadership.
Yeah.
It's a trait from the adventurer's companion. You possess the capability to win the trust of others and push them to action. When under pressure, other men naturally turn to you for guidance, as ducklings follow their mother or wolf pups heed their father. I hate the way in which that is phrased, but anyway. So there are leadership situations that are kind of clearly relevant. You're trying to galvanize the youth of Aldred's old hometown to fight the bandits. You are you kind of like try to convince other leaders to join your cause. I think this is relatively self-explanatory in that way. I think the important thing is that there's a level of pressure there. That you've got to have an under pressure situation, and also I think it kind of helps to have some kind of plan. That's not necessarily required. And to draw a distinction between leadership and lordly, Leadership is a practical application of kind of getting people to do what you want them to do. Lordly is the perception of you as a lord, as opposed to actually being any good at leading people. So
is your gait, is the way you hold yourself and present yourself in converse with those around you. Yeah, totally.
Is that where actually and then going back to that Dane example, leadership might not help you, because if he views you as a lower status to him, he'd be like, all right, you're a good person to go lead that rabble maybe, but lordly would be more like talking on the same level.
Yeah, so essentially leadership would be you're a good colonel in my forces. Lordly is you're a prince of the realm. So if you get leadership and lordly together, it's almost kind of like you can walk the walk and talk the talk. So you kind of get both qualities of that. So it's quite a powerful synergy in that not only do you carry yourself as a lord, but actually you've got the ability to enact that lordship in the field as you need to.
Yeah. So I don't want to use the word vision, but my kind of idea for Torg was that he would be a kind of low level sort of royalty almost of his clan, his very small part of dwarfdom, and that he was born into a kind of role of leadership, and along with that came some power, and that he was essentially, although he kind of operates in a very small corner of Middle Earth, he's so young, he's been inspired by the events of the Battle of Five Armies and the retaking of Erebor, and he kind of secretly he wants to be like Thorin Oakenshield, although he's a long way from being anywhere near that level of greatness. That's kind of his dream, is that he can aspire at least.
Yeah, he's also less dead than Thorin Oakenshield.
He's a lot less dead, for now.
Yeah, 100% less dead than Thorin. He has it like on a shirt. So lordly,
the alive Thorin.
Yeah, your dignified bearing arouses feelings of reverence and respect in onlookers. So more about social situations, I think, more about kind of hierarchical culture, and probably also more about first impressions than anything else. Because if you kind of go into that looking all lordly and then you talk like David Beckham, then you're going to kind of maybe possibly erode some of that lordliness.
And then just to throw the kind of the potentially negative side, wherein lies the fun, that might single Torg out on the battlefield.
Yes, that's the note that I made. It may also attract attention from enemies who think of the lordly character as being the leader, and certainly worth ransom, worth a scalp to take back to the master.
They take the ritual.
Yeah, that's it. Also, possibly worth your companions giving you up. Take him. He's worth it, not us.
Or could we just not kidnap him and ransom him?
There's nothing stopping you.
You get some shadow points for that, I'm sure.
Yeah. Shadow points, yeah. Willful. Your confidence in your friends is your weakness. No, sorry. Your confidence in your own judgment makes you deaf to all counsel but your own. Okay, right.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all.
So I think there is some positive benefit to this, and it's similar to that kind of like determined, or some aspects of determined, in that if somebody is trying to influence you down a poor route, then you're not going to be kind of like easily led in that way. So if somebody's trying to kind of like Grima Wormtongue you through, then you're going to be able to naturally resist that kind of temptation. And those who value independence and acting on their own convictions will be naturally more kind of like positive towards this character, because you're out there, you're doing these things. So you can imagine maybe something like Beorn responding well to a willful character. They may disagree with the actions that you're taking, but nobody can say that you aren't doing what you feel is right. You're taking your convictions and moving them forward. But, actually, there are times when you all need to take a little bit of advice. There are times when you kind of like need to sit down and listen to counsel. There are times when you need to be open to criticism to be able to grow as an individual. So, there are downsides as well.
Yeah, so just in terms of the realities of playing that out, Paul, and knowing that you're less inclined to invoke traits against players.
Mm-hmm.
In the last session, I think you said something like you've invoked it against yourself quite effectively, so I don't really need to.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I mean, I plan to use it in that way. I want to, I want Torg to make mistakes and get into trouble because of that trait and because of other traits.
Is this? Sorry, is this where the innately heroic nature of the One Ring comes in the sense that you're meant to view all these through the positive hero lens?
Yeah, I think so.
Rather than actually, they probably are. It probably is all about you only go with your own decision, but you're the right because you're the hero kind of thing, rather than it being that kind of actually you are going to make mistakes and get it wrong.
But it's written into the trait that it's going to cause you problems.
Is it the only one that has something like that?
No, I think there are other.
I mean, Determined touches on that as well, doesn't it? It's the single-mindedness of being determined that might blindside you.
Proud is all positive, isn't it?
Well, a lot of I think there's no balance between the traits, and I don't think there's any particular rhyme or reason as to whether there's a good one or a bad one or anything like that. I think, and to be honest, I'm focusing more on the positive aspects of Willful because I think the negative aspects of it are so obvious. It kind of like doesn't bear as much explanation, and I think. God, sorry.
Sorry, Paul. Well, when I say I will invoke it in a way that gets Torg into trouble, I don't mean I'm going to willfully get the party dead.
Yeah.
I mean, this is about having fun and playing a game for fun. So, to me, there's fun to be had in playing a willful character whose confidence in his own abilities renders him deaf to everyone's counsel.
Like we could have cleared off and not bothered dicking around with the cart for an entire session, but your willfulness made sure that we did.
And Curious as well. Curious is another one that is worded in a way that suggests danger.
I know Bold was. That's why I didn't take it.
Well, yeah,
Bold didn't make sense for me.
Bold is kind of like Brave plus.
Brave plus stupidity.
Well, and to be honest, I mean, what we're trying to do here is just build a consensus of the way in which the mechanics can be expressed more than necessarily the way that the fiction will be played. And I think having a willful character kind of shakes things up. And people will respond to a willful character by their own natures and by their own experiences. So some people will push hard against the willful because they're not going to be bossed around. Who the hell are you to tell me this? Some people will push against a willful character because actually you've just got to follow the bloody rules. Other people will admire the willful character because they are doing what they feel is right and they're not letting themselves be distracted by these other things. They've got a higher purpose, or however that personality wants to code the behavior. Really, I think because of the nature of the last session and the way in which Joe played it, I did want to just pull out a few positives and the way in which it could be positively interpreted to balance that as well. If I'm honest. Okay, so that's good discussion. So Luftar then. So Smithcraft, Tunneling, Determined, Hardened, Enemy Law, Orcs are the ones I think that you have.
Yes.
So
I think most of them have been covered now by our discussion.
Smithcraft, Tunneling, Determined. Are you comfortable with those? With the kind of scope of those?
Yeah. That's how I guess interpreted it, and it was good to just have a general discussion about them as well, just to get some ideas around that. Yeah. So I think that just leaves two. Yeah.
So we have Hardened. You show the mettle of a seasoned adventurer. Misfortune has taken its toll on you, or your eyes have already witnessed too many hard deeds. So I think there's an argument to be made here about some corruption tests or some shadow tests in terms of, actually it's not as bad as the last war. I've seen worse kind of thing. It may allow you to kind of keep on going where a more experienced hand would falter, for instance. And anybody, in a more social circumstance, anybody who wants, somebody who's got the scars, got the grey hairs of experience, as opposed to kind of somebody who's maybe got the enthusiasm of inexperience, would be drawn to the character, whereas others may just be a bit concerned about where that experience has taken you and whether you are actually reliable, or whether you're kind of like becoming the crazed drill sergeant who possibly shouldn't have done that additional tour of Vietnam. And I also think that you can play the experience aspect of that in as well. As a hardened adventurer, you're unlikely to forget to pack the tent. Yeah. So you could potentially invoke this a little bit outside of the 3 core ways to say, actually, I do have that piece of equipment. I do have a crowbar with me. I could kind of like do this thing. Experience has told me that you don't leave home without your towel. So I think
bring it down.
Those are all kind of ways in which I think the hardened trait could come to bear. So are we all kind of comfortable with that? You okay with that, Matt?
Yeah, I think I linked that closely with age as well. It's like, I don't want to be sort of rude, but you know what? I've seen that shit, Or, like you just said, having that experience, those years, that perhaps I can draw on that in a particular situation. And hang on a minute, back in '94, I think I've done a similar thing.
Yeah, you're in a social circumstance, and you might want to kind of like make a whatever a persuade roll is, and your kind of persuade roll starts with. Now you might think it is like that, but it just doesn't work that way. Backed up with a conviction of having been there trying to do that at the time. So I think that plays into it as well. There. So enemy law orcs. Enemy law is not a single speciality. You must select the race of enemies this speciality applies to. Orcs. This trait gives you the knowledge of the characteristics, habits, strengths, and weaknesses of your chosen enemy. Warriors and hunters often owe their survival to such knowledge. Slayers invariably dedicate themselves to the destruction of an enemy. Clues in the name.
Yeah.
So I think there's some relevance to tracking that kind of enemy. Knowing their likely battle plans, tactics, possibly their numbers. Sandmen always walk in single file kind of thing. I think that enemy law orcs could be used to supplement a battle preliminary roll if you knew you were up against orcs. As a fact.
Yeah, when we discussed it just now, I was trying to think, and inadvertently I've kind of linked that across other things as well. So, for example, going into battle with orc, I would, like you said, use this in a battle role, but also, like we discussed, weapons before, perhaps on a different level, not in that preliminary role, but use the Smithcraft to understand what's their equipment, where are they from, and then you can also link it to search as well, where I just want to make sure that we find where they're going, or perhaps we need to know where they're from in terms of which way they've come. So the idea is to put essentially all my eggs really in one basket, which is orcs. But that's because
and the slaying thereof.
The way. Yeah. So I would like to be, or Loftar is becoming, well, he has become an expert in orc, so that he can be useful if the party needs to find them, trace them, kill them, and all the other things.
Oh, it's a track and trace, basically.
Yeah. Because I have my own app. That I have developed my own app.
Okay. Is it anyway? So you'll know some. I think we talk about the preliminary roles. Just remember that the main advantage to using a trait would be if you got a great success to invoke it to get that third and final advancement point. But also, if you were to invoke it to get an automatic success, I think you only get the one bonus dice from a normal success, so there's a trade-off there on consistency versus the additional ones. But I also think that you would be able to make an assessment maybe of some of the specific skills that the orcs may possess. For instance, you might get a feel for what they could use their hate points for, and so you'd be able to get a feel for that. I'm not saying that you'll learn everything about them, but kind of like do I know anything special? Is there any clues about this orc? Have I encountered them before? Are there any rumours that we might need to be aware of, and so on? And also maybe you know some smattering of the black speech of Mordor.
Probably, yeah. I would like to think so. You know, some simple commands: flank them, go, stop, attack.
Get
I
the
don't know.
dwarf.
That's speculations. Yeah.
Play dead, roll
Kill
over,
the dwarf.
Yeah.
high five.
Did I leave the gas on? You know, that kind of
The
thing.
meat's back on the menu, boys.
Yeah. so you also
2 beers, please. 1 meat, please.
you also know the restaurants in Mordor and their TripAdvisor reviews fairly well. Okay.
That's very useful.
So that's I kind of think where you so maybe you would be able to use enemy law orcs for an unforeseen role to try to understand the exchange between the orcs as you've sneaked up on them, what they're kind of like talking about. Yeah, that would feel like a fair usage of the trait to kind of get a flavour for it. Okay, any questions on that one? Cool.
No, it's just I just want to say it's a very useful session to go in in some depth, because it gives me ideas for our next session. So that's good. Yeah, thanks.
Cool. Good. Where we're all going to relocate to the Shire, and just play out being happy fun hobbits.
Sounds perfectly reasonable.
Really. Is it a pure role play campaign all
It's
about
all-
Farmer Mag?
It's just about
that's it.
smoking.
Yeah,
And going to the pub.
what we're going to do is we're going to trace the production of pipeweed from source all the way through
Right.
to arriving at Torg's pipe.
I'm gonna change willful to gardening.
Relevant. I like it.
Herb law.
Okay,
You should
cool.
have had smoking herb law. You could have had like an entire stoner character.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you very much, guys. I thought that was a good conversation. I think it's really good to baseline that stuff and just to have some of that. God knows how this will turn out in edit, but it shouldn't. It'll probably be a little bit harder than the normal, but it shouldn't be impossible. So okay, thank you very much for those people who have watched this. I hope this was useful. Clearly, we didn't do all of the traits because 1, time, 2, relevance. But I think it also provided a little bit more of insight into the characters as well. And if I get around to it, there will possibly be a article on the Mostly Off Topic website that'll cover basically. I'll just take my notes that I've used and just turn it into something just to get a twofer. Anything final before we finish, guys?
Not from me.
No, thanks again.
No, that's good. Yeah, useful.
Excellent. So next session, which we are live streaming September the
29th?
August the 29th. August the 29th. Saturday, August 29th, 7 p.m. UK time. And we'll be live streaming that on our Twitch channel, twitch.tv/mostly off topic. Thanks, guys. Cheers.
As well.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye.